Chapter 8, Art Study. Let's take some time to look at some traditional classical art and see how all of these things that we've talked about have been applied. All right, so I want to look at the bounce light mainly on this image. Single light source, light coming in from the side here, lighting her face, but a tremendous amount of detail here, light bouncing off of her shirt and her dress back up onto her face, and it's really well defined shape, from the light. You get the soft light that's brighter here, and then it falls off and it wraps around her face, and it kind of gets darker in the corners. All of these nice little soft gradients of the light, so you can really tell, the shape of her face. Nice specular highlights here on the waves. Nice volumetric depth here as she gets deeper into the water. You get more of that kind of green. Very simple but beautiful image using a single light source, but having a lot of complex depth from the light because of the way it bounces and scatters around. This is one of my favorite artists. I love all of the detail in here. The very, very soft light. So we get this nice kind of darkening, these gradients of tone into the corners and the dark areas. All these subtle gradients everywhere that kind of define everything. You get these gradients as objects get closer and closer together. The floor is being more and more occluded by the objects, and so you're getting this shadow that gets tighter and tighter and darker as it gets into the corners. Nice specular highlights, these specular reflections back here that really tell you what material these are made of. These are smooth metal objects, versus the wall being a very diffuse soft object. Nice use of noise to kind of break up the details and add little subtle bits of detail here. The skin tones, we get that whole kind of color temperature thing, and the saturation as it gets into the darker areas. Look at this tone versus the tone out here. A lot of that subtle detail on top of it being a well composed image with an interesting set of what's going on. All just the light, from the perspective of light, does so much for this image. Being able to tell your eye, the shape and form of everything in here. Nice refraction through the glass, and the little, again, lots of little gradients that kind of tell your eye where to go. Here's a beautiful image just showing atmosphere. So you have the depth that tells you how close and far something is. The levels of the black level here versus the black level here tells us there's a lot more atmosphere that helps give that sense of depth, and even more as you get back here. Beautiful specular reflection on the water. These little highlights that help you read the surface of this. Nice little specular highlights on the leaves over here that tell you enough about that these are palm leaves. The way they're kind of shiny. Very well read. It's a classical Rembrandt painting. Looking at his understanding of light and shadows, the whole color temperature thing again, you get this kind of yellow tones to orange to red as it falls off into the darker areas. Beautiful understanding of these soft shadows, where the light gets hottest here and then it fades up into the corners, the way things, all these kind of gradients, into the darker areas. Nice specular highlights on these little details here. This was mainly about the dark on light, light on dark, composing the image, choosing the light, and saying, he wanted to make this area really dark to contrast with the light, back here, so that your eye gets drawn to the actual waterfall. Kind of put a pool of light, another pool down here to, add interest, but he has these dark spots, these dark little shadowed areas, and like this is, almost completely silhouetted, off compared to the background, and he used the mist to help provide some distance, some depth here between these different kind of layers of the scene. This one's interesting. It's a very soft light, again, which is difficult to do if you can understand it well. This is very well done. You get the light coming in from the sky. In here, it's interesting to note the bounce light. You get this kind of soft, warm light, and even though it's not direct sunlight, you're still getting this glow of the light coming from the ground back up in here versus on the side. There's less bounce. And again, that soft gradients into all the corners and the creases, the very subtle kind of shadowing as things go back into distance. Just a beautiful soft image. I love this one for two reasons. Well, lots of reasons, but two main ones. The understanding of bounce light here is just gorgeous. You know, backlit again, which is very beautiful. You can see the shape and the form. Things are kind of lit, but you know, there's not a lot of direct sunlight. Well, there is some parts here, but most of the image is lit with the light that's bouncing. So you can imagine this glow, this kind of yellow glow here that is brighter here than it is, you know, over here from the light that's bouncing off of her dress and then back onto the marble. Same with the light that's bouncing from this bright spot on the floor back up into here, and all these nice kind of warm areas. The second thing that I really love about this image is how well that this artist was able to capture the very subtle subsurface scattering of the marble. The light that comes through the marble, it feels like real marble. You get this kind of colored gradation of the shadows bleeding into the stone as it goes into, you know, as the light diffuses inside the surface of the stone. Very well portrayed here. It's just a really soft image. Again, you get that, you know, your key shadow, you know, the nice sharp shadow from the sun, and then all of these nice soft gradient shadows of the fill of the sky, and a little bit of the cool of the sky intermixing with the warm colors. Really beautiful image. This one has a really nice kind of classical art here, latent stuff, with drawing your eye to the right place. So instead of lighting it all where all the characters are out in the sun, just choosing one little shaft of light to come in, and even not make a crisp shadow on that light. You know, the light kind of falls off. You know, by the time you're down here, you're not being hit directly by that light, but this real soft shadow, you know, subtle kind of fall off of the light. You know, it's really beautiful. A lot of nice subsurface scattering through the cloth. A lot of light, bounced light from, you know, coming off of the front of his jacket here. You can imagine bouncing back onto her. You know, all the light that in here. That's all this nice soft bounce light. The gradients of the shadows, you know, into the corners and the creases, you know, the nice dark contact on the floor. A lot of bounce light on his back. These characters, you know, this artist has pushed them into the background to give this real sense of depth between here, just by the use of the light, you know, to push them back. They're important, but they're not as important as to what is actually happening. And then even back here, you get the atmosphere into this forest. Say that's really far back there. A lot of bounce light, nice specular highlights and specular reflections. Beautiful image. I love this one. This one is framed so well. There's a lot of emotion in it, with the characters interacting with each other. But the thing that really does, you know, gets me excited about this image is the light. You get this real, you know, bright light, this pool of light in most of the image. There's a little bit of direct sunlight we can see on them. This nice, again, backlit, beautiful backlit rim light. But most of it is bounce light from something off screen or something right here on this tree, bouncing back onto them and, you know, drawing our eye, you know, right to, you know, the center of the image. You know, of course, the form and the shape and the composition, the way everything kind of wraps around. But just from the light and color perspective, we get the subsurface scattering on the leaves, you know, the leaves down on here. We get the gradients, you know, of tone just into the darker areas, the light on dark, dark on light type of, you know, in order to draw our eye and break this down into layers. We get this nice atmosphere back there. The levels of black in the far background are far less deep than the stuff in the foreground, because we got the atmospheric depth. You got this nice dark shadow to kind of frame this image in. You get the subsurface scattering through the cloth. There's just a lot of details here that just make the image really attractive. And most of that is the light and the color. This one's interesting because it's actually called Sunlight and Shadow. And it's less about what's in the image. You know, as you can tell, the artist even almost silhouetted certain areas. And it's more about this beautiful dappled light onto, you know, a beautiful piece of architecture. So the way the light wraps around the pieces, you know, choosing areas, you know, breaking things up with putting an extra shadow on this column and not on these two, you know, putting shadows in certain places, this nice gradient of tone up into the creases and the folds of, you know, the shape of the architecture. Just kind of a beautiful, beautiful image, little character down in here. I love this image. I love Bierstadt's images here. This in Yosemite, you wanted to make a lot of things that exaggerated the view of, you know, of what it's really like there. I mean, Yosemite is amazing, but this is even more amazing when you see the way he used the light and especially the extreme atmosphere here. You can't even tell the details. Probably in the original painting you would see it far better, but this beautiful use of the light that's coming in. All of the light on these cliffs here that's bouncing back up is light bouncing off the atmosphere and bouncing off of these faces and giving this nice warm kind of side rim onto the mountains to help us understand the shape and the form of these from this soft bounced light. I like particularly about this image that this entire cliff wasn't all lit up really bright. It would bring too much light here. We kind of want to draw our eye down into this area, so he intentionally made it like there was a shadow of a cloud or something on the top of this cliff. You get that dark on light, but it's this beautiful silhouette, and these kind of gradients of the way the light hits, so that our eye just kind of travels all around down in here. Very beautifully lit image. And the last one we'll study was from the same artist, and again, a more fantastic view of reality, painted, with the more extreme mountains and kind of pulling the highlights of everything, from the mountains. I don't think there's a real place like this. If there was, I'd like to go there, but really beautifully lit, the light coming through, the volumetric kind of subsurface diffusion of the light through the clouds, and you get all these beautiful colors and tones. You get this nice silhouetting. A lot of the atmosphere in here is used to draw this cliff from that cliff, from these different areas, to give you that kind of layering, that real sense of depth, that this is just massively huge. Putting, from a compositional standpoint, which we didn't talk much about on this DVD at all, repeated elements, so trees here and trees back here to help define distance and depth and scale also, and even some trees way back there, so you understand that these waterfalls are just massive. Beautiful specular highlights to kind of help rim, the little beam of light that's coming down and lighting these areas to kind of highlight these waterfalls, highlight the pool on the lake, a little dark spot to just kind of break things up. This whole, well framed, the colors, the way the saturation works, it's just a beautiful image. So looking at all of these, traditional art pieces, we can see a lot of the things we've talked about have been applied, whether the artist talked about it or not, but they understood these details and were able to apply it to their art creation. All right, so we have one more chapter, and I want to go in and we'll actually apply some of these things and do some more painting.